5:30. We're going to call this special meeting of the City Council to order. Without objection, we will dispense with the Pledge of Allegiance and the invocation. There being no objection, brings us to item number 3, citizens to be heard. There are no citizens to be heard. Brings us to item number 4, City Council comments. Without objection, we'll dispense with City Council comments. There being no objection, brings us to item number 5, agenda items. Item 5.1, presentation, Public Improvement District Review and Basic Concepts for Development of 22-acre tract along Loop 1604. Bill and Patrick. Bill,
Yes,
do you want to get started?
I'll bring Patrick up here in a minute. I just want to give an overview. In March of this year, City Council adopted City Policy Number 25 to address two powers granted by state law. The Public Improvement District, established under Chapter 372 of Texas Local Government Code, called PIDS, and other agreements established under Chapter 380. And the idea was that as Laddie was going to develop the over 22 acres, about 23 acre property, we were going to consider using these vehicles to help with the financing of the infrastructure and those kinds of things. So a little bit that's been fleshed out a little bit. He's worked on some concept slides. I sent and emailed that to you earlier today. You may or may not have seen it. We're going to show you one of those. What we're trying to do today is give you a basic understanding of what a PID is, a Public Improvement District, because we expect to receive a petition from Laddie next week, which is going to petition the City Council to establish this Public Improvement District. And so instead of just throwing you into the lion's den next week, on the 26th of August, we thought we would take an advantage of an opportunity just to kind of refamiliarize yourself with the PID. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Patrick Bourne. He can explain a little bit about himself, but he's a consultant that Laddie has engaged with. He does PIDs and these kinds of things for a living. Curtis and I were able to go to a briefing with Laddie where he presented, and we asked him to come to present to you tonight. Even though this is not budget, we're trying to do this over a series of things so it's not jammed, onto you and you have to make a decision. So without further ado, Patrick Bourne. Patrick, you come up to the podium. You might just tell them a little bit about yourself before we get to the presentation.
Happy to. Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it, Mayor, members of council. Appreciate you letting me stop in tonight. It sounds like you've got a very busy evening, so I'll try to keep this as short, as sweet as possible for you. My name is Patrick Bourne. I work with Sundance Analytics. Our firm specializes in structuring financing districts between developers, cities, and counties to help finance public infrastructure and get that built for projects. We utilize public improvement districts, tax increment reinvestment zones, municipal utility districts, really any of those tools that have been created by the state to help incentivize or to help accelerate or facilitate the development of public infrastructure. And so tonight we wanted to talk a little bit about this development and then talk with you a little bit more in detail about what a public improvement district is, how we're hoping to utilize it for this development. Make sure my arrows are working right here. Okay, so just a really quick introduction. I introduced myself, but I wanted to introduce a few other members of the team. They're not here this evening, but you'll be familiarizing yourselves with their names as we go through this process. The developer on this project is Bitter Blue Development. The point of contact is Laddie Denton. He's running point. He'll be the one working through this development. And then also he's utilizing a PID attorney, Caroline McDonald, with Brown and McDonald. And then as I mentioned, I'll be helping him from the financial standpoint as his PID financial consultant. My understanding is you guys know a little bit about this project, so I don't want to take too much time talking about this, but it's a roughly 22-acre development located south of Loop 1604, east of 1535. It's a mixed-use development consisting of roughly 13 acres of retail, hospitality, commercial, as well as townhomes, somewhere between 32 to 40 townhomes will be developed on this site. We're still working through the final land plan as we work with city staff to get to, that could have been here. I'm getting it too close to the microphone.
Sorry.
As we work through city staff, getting a land plan that works for everybody, but this is roughly what we're showing here. We anticipate that this development will require roughly $4 to $5 million of horizontal public infrastructure that we'll be putting in there. In addition to providing that public infrastructure to the city, putting that in, this project is anticipated to generate both property tax revenues and sales tax revenue resulting from the development that we're putting in here. Kind of going from here, again, we're still putting together a detailed land plan. We're still putting together the concepts. But what we did want to show you as we're working through the retail as well, we wanted to show you a few of the renderings that are being done by another project that's being developed by Bitter Blue to kind of show you the types of those townhomes that we would be putting on or putting in this development, kind of give you a little concept, showing the front elevation, rear elevation, the side elevation of some of those townhomes that we envision going in this development. Those are some renderings, as well as here is that development. This is the Corey Heights Villas, as well as showing those kind of under construction. So you saw both the rendering and actual development. As we go through the project, what I wanted to talk a little bit about tonight was the Public Improvement District. Kind of discuss a little bit about what it is and how we would go work with the city to get it structured. At the end of the day, a public improvement district is really just a financing tool to help fund public infrastructure at a lower cost, right? That is one of the biggest hurdles of any development is how do you put in the public infrastructure before you're able to sell off the vertical development to the builders, right, to the ultimate end users. At the front end, you have to expend a significant amount of money for that public for the public improvements. And so what the Public Improvement District does and why the state authorized this, it provides a way for developers to work hand in hand with municipalities, with cities, with counties to obtain low-cost financing for those public improvements. Public improvement districts can only be utilized for public infrastructure. They can't be utilized for any private improvements. The way that a public improvement district works is there's two different parts to it, I'll say. There's the creation of the district, where the developer requests that a boundary be created around his property. This boundary doesn't include any other part of the city. It is a boundary solely around his property. He then requests that a lien be placed, or let me keep going with those two parts, puts a boundary around his property and he requests that the PID be created. At that point in time, there's no lien placed on the property, there's no financial responsibility. The second step to the PID is the levy of assessments. That's where the developer requests voluntarily that a lien be placed on his property, a lien that will ultimately be used to fund the public improvements, okay? We work hand in hand with the city because when that lien is placed on the property, the developer agrees to repay that lien over traditionally a 30-year period. He will then work with the city and request that the city issue bonds that will be repaid with that lien and those payments that he places on his property. Again, that lien would not be placed on any property outside the boundaries of that district, so no development outside of his own development would ever be responsible for the repayment of that lien, for the repayment of those bonds. The city would never be responsible for the repayment of those bonds. That lien is placed on his property, so the bondholders who ultimately purchase those bonds, the only collateral to them is the land within the district. They can never come after the city for the payment of that debt. Couple of things to point out about these PID bonds. When the developer comes and requests that the city issue the bonds, the reason why they're wanting the city to issue that is because the city can issue that debt at a much lower interest rate than the developer would otherwise be able to obtain through traditional financing sources, okay? Whether that's mezzanine equity debt, whether that's bank financing. In today's current market, it is very difficult to obtain any type of financing, right? And the banks right now are reducing the thresholds and shrinking those to the amount that they'll lend to the developers. So it's all the more important to utilize these types of financing tools in order to be able to fund and bring in that public infrastructure at the front end of the deal. Couple other items to point out. The bonds are lower interest because these are tax exempt bonds. They're issued by the city. Like I mentioned, they are not a general obligation of the city. They are secured only by the property within the district. I want to go to this next slide here and discuss, okay, so what are some of the benefits here? When I look at these public improvement districts, it really is a partnership between the city, the developer, and then the end users as well. So let's walk through a few of the benefits of each player in this partnership. Let's first talk with the city. One of the benefits why many cities like to utilize a public improvement district is because a public improvement district is not a separate political entity. We're working with the city council. The city council gets to decide and vote when the PID is created. The city council votes when the assessment is levied and when the bonds are issued. The developer can request, but ultimately it's up to the council to decide, okay? This isn't a separate district within the city boundaries. It increases recurring property tax revenues. It attracts development that otherwise might be stalled because of the high cost of financing that they would otherwise have to pursue. In many cases, it incentivizes annexation if it's outside of the city boundaries. And then what it does is it provides for a higher quality of development. If we can bring in the development, we can attract higher end tenants, okay? From a property owner standpoint, I'm gonna talk about the end users here. PIDs are very unique compared to many of the other financing tools that are available in Texas. One of the unique things about public improvement districts is that they're repaid through an annual installment, meaning that repayment stays essentially fixed for the entire term of that PID bond. It does not fluctuate or increase based on increasing property values. As property values go up, many financing districts follow that and they stay tied to that appraised value. Public improvement districts, it'll be a level, consistent repayment of that debt that also has a finite term. Once the bonds are paid off after that term, that debt goes away, that district is removed. There are no future payments to those end users. Because the PID debt has a finite term, it can be prepaid at any point in time. So if there's an end user, let's say that there's a tenant who says, you know what, I'd rather stop making these payments, they can prepay that at any time without any early prepayment penalty. It can also be used as from an incentive standpoint. If a developer has a tenant that he really wants to bring in and attract, he can partially prepay a portion of that. That's not an option in many of the other financing tools that are provided by the state. From the developer standpoint, why is he reaching out to the city? The key reason, as I mentioned, is because it provides for a lower cost financing, which makes the project feasible, right? This way he can put in that infrastructure. It allows the developers to get over that hurdle that I talked about at the beginning. How do you pay for the upfront public infrastructure before starting your vertical development? It provides them the PIDs provide for the ability to utilize it as upfront construction bonds. So it truly can be infused into that capital stack. And then because the bonds are long-term, it provides long-term financing for long-term infrastructure costs, right? You're funding a road. This provides, instead of doing a 5-year bank loan, this is a 30-year PID bond. I want to kind of get past that, kind of move a little bit here as we take a look at what are we proposing. Now, these are very preliminary numbers, but what I wanted to do was just kind of throw a few numbers up there just to kind of show you how this would work, how this would look, right? How would a PID operate? The number up top shows the bond amount, right? We would request that the city issue bonds. If the city issued bonds, we're showing there, let's say, for example, a $4.5 million bond, that would net about $3.7 million in an improvement fund that could be used for public infrastructure. There are other financing costs involved because part of when we create this PID, we want to make sure that the city is not coming out of pocket a dime. The city should not have to spend any money for the creation of this PID or the issuance of these bonds. And so from the PID bonds, we set aside an amount for a reserve fund that the bondholders like to see. We set amount to pay for the underwriter that is selected by the city. Same thing, we set aside an amount for cost of issuance to pay for city's bond counsel, city's attorney, the cost of an appraisal, city's financial advisor. We want to make sure that all of your costs are accounted for so that the city residents shouldn't have to pay for this, okay? I'm showing here that we're looking at a projected, again, all of this is just preliminary estimates right now, but we would anticipate with this development, the current plan is that the developer would actually obtain financing and issue bonds on the back end to make it a cleaner, smoother process with the city and their team. We talked about the annual payment that would be made. What we want to make sure when we're kind of putting this structure together, we don't want to overburden the end users. This is supposed to be a tool that attracts development. This is supposed to be a tool that attracts desired development, so we don't want to put too much of a repayment on the property owners. So as we look at this, we've set what we call a PID equivalent tax rate. As I mentioned, it's not really an ad valorem tax, it's a payment, but we set that payment so it would be equivalent to about 52 cents. We wanted to make sure that it was less than the city of San Antonio tax. We wanted to make sure that we were competitive with the surrounding market. As we kind of move forward with that, you can kind of see here, again, a few more numbers. I'll breeze through this because this is a lot of numbers on a slide. But I wanted to just kind of show you that as we go through this, we really look at this on a detailed level as we look at each different type of product that we're planning on putting on the property. We want to make sure how that assessment and how that repayment would be allocated in accordance with the PID Act, in accordance with the law, to make sure that everybody is paying an equitable amount based on their type of land use. So you kind of look in the bottom right-hand corner, we've set it up so that everybody's paying that equivalent 52 cents. Kind of wrapping up here, we mentioned that the PID is a two-part process. The first part would be to create the PID, okay? That requires the developer submitting a petition to the city where the city would accept the petition and then they would call a public hearing, allowing any of the property owners, anybody in the city to come and say what they would like to say for or against the PID, right? And then at a second meeting, the city would hold the public hearing and then they would create the district. At that point in time, when the district's created, there are no bonds issued. There's no lien placed on the property. It's almost like a preparatory state to create that district so that it's ready to issue the bonds when they're available. So that's why I'm showing that at a future time, we would then request that the city levy the assessments and issue the bonds. From a timeline standpoint, what we would like to do is submit the PID petition at the August 26th City Council meeting, request that the city accept that, and call a public hearing to be held on September 6th. By that point in time, we're hoping to have a development agreement in front of the city as well so that they can hold the public hearing, create the PID, and approve it and approve the development agreement as well, and then we can move forward from there. That kind of wraps up. I wanted to, like I mentioned, I wanted to keep this brief but go into enough details to hopefully help you understand the process, but then I just wanted to turn it over to see if you guys had any other questions, anything that you wanted to discuss further.
Okay. We're open for questions. We'll start with Pete.
So, Patrick, one of the things the city has really worked hard on is to ensure that we have a very, very strong financial background, which makes our rating very good when we go out for bonds.
Mhm.
Is there any way that this would affect our rating as a bond? And as you start looking at kind of multiple scenarios, how that would go through if for some reason the developer would, if the development would go under or something like that, would that affect the city's bond rate? Or the amount of money that's involved, would that affect the city's bond rate?
No, it would not impact the city's bond rating. These are unrated bonds, so it doesn't impact the city's bond rating from that standpoint. In addition to that, and your financial advisor would tell you the same thing, that it would not impact your bond rating. It's not secured by the city, which is a big thing. It's secured only by the property. The other thing that I would point out is that when these bonds are issued, I mentioned there that we had the bond amount and then several different costs. One of those items in there was a reserve fund. What the bondholders like to do is set aside essentially 1 year's worth of debt service payment to make sure that that can be paid before anything gets defaulted. In the state of Texas, we've been issuing PIDs for several decades now, okay? There has never been a PID that has defaulted on the debt. One of the things that Texas is very careful about is before those bonds are issued, an appraisal is done. And in your policy, what you guys had mentioned is that when those bonds get issued, prior to that issuance, an appraisal must be done. And the value of that property needs to be 2 times greater than the amount of the bonds. And so even in the event that property values were to decrease by 50%, you've got whoever the bank is that holds the note to that land. What we've seen in other states is that they'll always step in because they don't want to lose that property. So it becomes a very secure form of debt.
Okay, Conrad?
Just, you have the tax rate as 52 cents. Is this a completely separate rate from the one that we normally levy on property?
Yes, this would be an assessment above and beyond the current existing tax rate that the property owners would pay.
Does it matter how far off it is from current rates?
So what we were trying to do in doing that, because you're right, it is an additional assessment payment by those property owners that we're putting on there for them to repay over time. What we wanted to do is we looked around at the surrounding area, which is why we wanted to make sure that we were less than the city of San Antonio, because that's what a lot of other commercial tenants, the townhome users, will be looking at the surrounding area when they're talking about the property taxes they're paying.
Our city is 0.312.
Correct.
So, okay.
Yours is. And so this would be above and beyond that. Mhm.
So that would be 80.
I had the total amount here. One second.
83 or something?
It would be a 258 total equivalent tax rate is what we're looking at, that all in, because the current all-in tax rate within your city is about a 206. So adding 52 cents on that would bump it up to about a 258. If we're looking at areas that have PIDs in the I'm going to say the San Antonio metro area, as well as Central Texas, you're looking at closer, they push it up to about a $3 total equivalent tax rate. As you go down to the Houston metro area and Dallas, it goes well above that $3. We wanted to make sure that we were keeping this on a very low end. We want to make sure that this project is marketable to those end users.
Okay, Maggie?
I realize these are preliminary sketches and so on, but wanted to, are there any plans like amenities for this area, like a pool or a tennis court? And if so, who would be responsible for the care?
That's a great question. There are amenities that are planned. I would have to defer to the developer for the level and the type of amenities that are planned for this. But my expectation is that all of that would be taken care of by a property owners association. We had discussed that because that is the common form of maintaining those types of amenities.
We will get more details that will include some of the details of the amenities at the 26th August.
Okay. Lee?
This is essentially a bubble you're creating for the finances, the wall that you mentioned. I saw some drawings earlier of a project going on, multi-story. This being inside of a fictitious bubble, does that change anything about our ability of our fire department to influence whether or not structures are sprinkled or materials that were going into them had a rating that would make the fire chief happy?
Wonderful question, okay? One of the beauties of the PID is that the city still controls everything in there. The only reason that we're creating that bubble in there is because we don't want anybody else in the city to be responsible to have to repay this debt. But nothing else changes that they would be required to do. It's more of a boundary to keep the debt from flowing out as opposed to the city coming in.
Buddy?
Yeah, just to piggyback on Conrad's question, the PID is defined on 30 years. If it's prepaid, does it go away once it's paid?
The assessment on that parcel would go away. The PID itself stays there because that has to be in place for any portion of the district that doesn't prepay, but the lien on any individual parcel can be prepaid, and that a lien release is then attached to the title showing that there's no more assessment on that property. The district boundary would exist until all of the debt is gone, and then the entire district boundary would be removed.
Okay.
Okay. You have another question, Pete?
So in the first diagram that you showed, there was actually there was residential and there's also commercial.
Mhm.
Does the PID include both the commercial and residential, or just the commercial?
The PID would include the entire property.
So in a couple things, we're going to propose to rezone this from B2 to MXD. And so that'll be part of his petition, and that'll go to P&Z in September. That's where we're currently planning on doing that. Also part of our team is Dan Santee, who, as you might recall, was very familiar with PIDs, but our bond attorney is Stephanie Leby, who works PIDs quite frequently. Curtis has already reached out to talk to her, and she's got a heads up on that. And then obviously our financial advisor. So just as we went through the process for the $10 million bond, we actually have done that recently, so we're familiar with it. It's really the same team, and then they are familiar with these PIDs as well.
Okay. Okay, I guess it's my
I have
turn,
another
Maggie?
question. Could we look at the sketch again of the outlay,
Did you say the schedule?
the sketch?
Oh, the sketch.
I'm sorry.
I misheard you. I'm sorry.
Must have been the first one.
Yeah, I
One
think,
more.
Keep going.
let's keep
Keep
going.
Keep going.
That one right there.
That one right there.
There we go. Yeah, very, very beginning.
Okay. Number one. Okay, you've got down here retail by the Palm Hill Drive. What do you have in mind for that? Or is that just a placeholder that's,
So these are placeholders, and so, and actually that'll be Laddie working through that.
okay,
You'll recall that there was 2 potential half-acre lots there,
right?
and so that's just a placeholder.
Okay.
And then the same thing with the
Hospitality?
retail sites above that. That could be 1 cell to a large box. That could be 5 parcels. That could be 3. And then they've tried to carve out that new one, which is on the northeast of there. That's new. But you can see also that there is a representation of a trail system, that trail will
Right.
go through the green belt on the bottom, and then it'll extend up towards a pond that will be created there. And as part of the hospitality track, there will be landscaping and a significant amount of work done there.
Okay, so there is thought of the hospitality track, is that for sure, or just,
That's a placeholder, but
Place-
this, according to Laddie, this PID and the infrastructure cost that's being accounted for greatly increases the likelihood that becomes a viable site for hospitality or
oh, looks
something else.
good. And the lake is also something that needs to be built. It's
There-
not
There's a
currently
current
there.
there's a current water flow there and stormwater retention. There's somewhat of a lake, whether it's a permanent lake or a dry lake, but there is something there. But
Okay.
the idea is they would create that and tailor that in to create kind of a walking trail that would be real nice for that.
It's something of an artesian spring, much like some of the homes in Chavano Park have. Okay, couple of questions.
Mhm.
I'm looking at this, we've got 13 acres of commercial, we've got another 2.5, 3 acres of townhomes. The value that is apportioned for the tax purposes is based upon the raw land value undeveloped of the footprints. And that's how you make these allocations, because the number is set at the beginning. I'm assuming that there's something that allows the PID district to set those numbers somewhat arbitrarily, but based on commercial standards. But that's how we allocate this.
So actually, we usually allocate it based on the estimated build-out value. There's a couple ways that we can do it. The state allows you, or legislation allows you to do it in any way that is equitable, okay? So that everybody's paying the same equitable amount based on their fair share. And so you can do it based on acreage, you could do it based on assessed value, you can do it based on appraised value. What we thought in looking through this, we looked through several of those different methods. We thought the best way to equitably allocate this, at least initially as we're looking at this, would be based on estimated build-out value. So we look at what's going to go on each one of those lots. We say, okay, this is what hospitality is going to be. Maybe acreage isn't the best idea to allocate that because of that type of land use. You may have some small retail sites in there. Same thing with the townhomes. Acreage might not be the best way to do it. Same thing with appraised value, because although those pieces of land may have the same value today, they aren't going to have the same value once they have vertical development. So we're looking ahead in the future and then allocating that assessment based on what we anticipate will go there. The nice thing is we don't have to make that determination until we actually levy the assessments, right?
Okay.
By that time, we expect that the infrastructure is going to be in. We should have contracts in place by that time with end users. We'll have a very good idea what those ultimate land uses are going to be. Right now, we're looking to create the district so that we can have a plan as we move forward in the marketing process, right? But that assessment will come at a later point in time, which is when we'll cement what that assessment methodology is.
Okay. Since the value is set at the beginning of the project, it means the people turning age 65 aren't going to affect this because the value is fixed. What happens if the value of the property goes down?
So because that payment is a fixed, essentially a fixed payment, that stays the same. Think of it as almost like a loan or like a mortgage, right? Your values may go up or down, but that payment will stay flat.
Okay.
And so we want to kind of take that into account, which is why we're trying to keep our payment on the very low end of the competitive market.
Okay. Is this a tax or is this a debt payment?
This is an assessment. Oftentimes when people say
So
tax,
it's not a tax.
it's not a tax, because
Okay.
a tax is associated with an ad valorem tax, which is based directly on the value of the property.
And
This
the-
is an assessment, not a tax.
And the reason I ask that is because of disability exemptions that are available in the state of Texas, including 100% exemption for 100% disabled veterans. And on that basis, you would not be able to collect. But this is an assessment, and so when we're dealing with old people, we're collecting their property taxes for debt service, but we're putting it into escrow, and then we're pulling it out the next year to pay taxes. That is not the case that you're describing here.
That is not the case. Every property owner
Okay.
would still pay the full amount
Okay.
of that annual installment.
Who manages the collection process and the payment process?
Very good question. So what we would recommend is that the city hire a PID administrator, okay? In the calculations that we utilize, we actually set aside an annual payment amount for the city to utilize to pay an administrator. As I mentioned, we don't want to incur your staff time. We also don't want you to incur any payments. So that's built in to those projections. That PID administrator every single year would come before the city council and say, hey, this is the amount of the payment this year, city council, please approve that. Then they make sure that that gets to the tax collector so that that payment shows up on the property tax bill.
Okay. Does this use up any part of our alternative minimum tax exemption amount available to us for issuance of bonds on an annual basis? Are these
No.
ATM exempt bonds?
This could impact your bank qualified debt.
That's what I'm asking.
Oh, okay.
Bank
So
qualified.
yes, this definitely would go against your bank qualified amount. And so what we
If
do.
we allow that, and Bill, have we discussed that with Laddie on allowing them to use our bank qualified rate?
Yeah, that's
On
the,
these-
that's the plan.
Well,
So
they're
it's
tax
four
exempt
point five,
bonds.
and so we have a $10 million cap,
Yeah.
so.
Well, they're
you know,
tax exempt bonds, and tax exempt bonds can either be issued as
Yeah.
bank qualified or non-bank qualified. I'm
And then
asking-
on that year, it only affects the year the issue of the
Yes.
bond. So again, that 1 year, we would only be able to issue, what, 5.5 million, which I can't imagine we would need to anyway. But, and then
Well,
the next year, you
it's-
would have your full 10 million again.
Just something we're giving away, and I wanted to make sure everybody realized that we would not have that facility. Not that we would use it, but that we can't let somebody else use it and then get an economic benefit from that.
If I can clarify one thing, this would not be bank qualified debt, but it does count towards your $10 million cap. But this wouldn't be considered bank
okay.
qualified debt because we wouldn't be getting the same rate that you would be getting because these are sold to different bond buyers. But in order to have bank qualified, you can only issue $10 million of debt in a year. This would count towards that $10 million number. So what we'll include, and you'd mentioned that Stephanie Leiby is your bond counsel, in the development agreement, there will be language that if in the year that we request bonds get issued, you were planning to utilize bank qualified debt, and for some reason we pushed you above the $10 million cap, then the developer would be responsible for making you whole for the difference in the interest rate that you would have to incur. Again, we want to make sure that there's no negative financial impact to the
Okay.
city for doing this.
Okay. As far as the underwriter selection process, is that a Bill Hill issue or is that a Laddie Denton issue?
That is a city issue. The city will select the underwriter. The city will select bond counsel and their financial advisor.
Okay. And then final question is the scheduling the publication for the public hearing, Bill. Have we already done that?
We have a
That order?
plan, yes, so that'll be the 16th of September,
Yes.
and we are teeing that all up. Curtis, we have the language already, right? Have we passed that to Kristen yet? We haven't, but we've talked about it, and as long as he gets the petition in by the 16th, we're good. Well, before the 16th, before the 26th of this month, we got to get it,
Yeah.
and then we'll immediately schedule the public hearing.
Okay, very good. Lee, you have another question?
Two questions. So other than the PID manager, we're not going to have to hire any other outside guns? Are we going to have to create a committee or commission or board within our city to watch this on a perpetual basis?
No, you won't have to create another board. The city council acts as the board. It'll come before the city council on an agenda item.
Okay.
As far as hiring additional people, you'll have the PID administrator. I would recommend you hire the PID administrator, okay, as a consultant. Most cities will utilize a bond counsel and a financial advisor when they're going through the PID bond issue process. Just like you do when you go through your city debt issuance, you'll reach out to your financial advisor, your bond counsel, and what we've done is we've set aside funds so that you'll be able to pay them from
Okay.
these PID bonds.
Second and last question. This bubble is an intellectual barrier. It does not exist physically, and I see a very ambitious construction going on there in an area which has got a natural escape route for evildoers. What do you foresee as protection against what will be equipment vandalizing and theft? We've had some reports.
I would have to defer to the developer and his construction team.
I don't
on
see a
that.
fence going around that, in other words.
I'm sure that they will comply with all of the city's construction requirements.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? If there are no other questions, Bill, do you have anything that you'd like to add at this time? If you don't, Patrick, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming today.
Thank you.
Item 5.2, presentation, discussion, and receipt of the no new revenue, voter approval, and de minimis tax rate calculations in accordance with State Tax Reform and Transparency Act. Bill and Brenda.
I
Brenda.
think I'm up tonight. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So Bear Appraisal District provided the 2024 certified valuation totals on July 22nd. The Bear County Tax Assessor Collector provided the tax rate calculations worksheet on August 6th. And the city staff uses that to determine the amount of ad valorem taxes that will be received based upon the different tax rates. The Texas Tax Code places a number of requirements on municipalities who propose a tax rate higher than the no new revenue or voter approval tax rates. So the analysis of tax rates worksheet, which was attachment A in the packet, provides an estimated total taxable assessed value with the freeze not included in that dollar amount, the actual tax assessed on freeze valued properties, summarizes the amount of potential taxes collected by maintenance and operations, that's also known as M&O, that's recorded in the general fund, and interest and sinking, or INS, that's recorded in the debt service fund, based upon last year's collections and projections for fiscal year 25 based on the current rate, the voter approval rate, the no new revenue rate, and the city manager's proposed fiscal year 25 rate. So the proposed rate would assess an additional $233,000 of property tax revenue, with $99,000 going to the debt service fund and $134,000 to the general fund. So also note the average taxable homestead value of a residence not subject to the tax freeze exceeds $1 million, an increase of 6.9% from last year's value. So in July, staff directed the Bear County Tax Assessor Collector to use $364,500 in total from the street maintenance and capital replacement funds in support of the debt payments on the Series 2022 general obligation bonds. So this amount is reflected in the INS section of the tax rate calculation worksheet and represents almost 3 cents of a tax rate per $100 valuation. So the city manager's proposed fiscal year 25 total tax rate is 31.2742 cents per $100 valuation. That's a 1/2 cent increase from the prior year's adopted tax rate, with increase applied to the INS rate, with the M&O rate at 27.5606 cents per $100 valuation, and the INS rate at 3.7136 cents per $100 valuation. So this proposed rate is higher than the no new revenue rate of 30.8956 cents per $100 valuation. The no new revenue rate is the tax rate that would produce the same amount of tax revenue if applied to the same properties taxed in both years. As the proposed rate exceeds the no new revenue rate, a public hearing is required to be conducted. So traditionally, Chevenot Park conducts 2 public hearings in conjunction with the first and second reading of the budget ordinance in September. That allows the residents plenty of time to voice their opinion regarding the rate. So the proposed rate is significantly lower than the voter approval tax rate of 33.8145 cents per $100 valuation. The voter approval rate is the calculated maximum rate allowed by law without voter approval and has 3 components: the INS rate, the no new revenue M&O rate times 1.035. This is the allowable annual increase, plus an unused increment rate. The unused increment rate component for this year's rate calculation is 1.3396 cents per $100 valuation, and is a 3-year rolling sum of the foregone revenue as calculated using the difference between the adopted tax rate and voter approval rate without the unused increment. I know, clear as mud, right? The city banks any unused amounts up to 3 years. If you really want to dive into it, you can see page 8 of the tax rate calculation. The proposed rate is significantly lower than the de minimis tax rate of 35.5588 cents per $100 valuation. The de minimis rate is a tax rate designed to give smaller taxing entities, including cities with a population of less than 30,000, some relief from the 3.5% voter approval rate. The de minimis rate is the sum of the taxing unit's no new revenue maintenance and operation rate, plus the rate that, when applied to a taxing unit's current total value, will impose an amount of taxes equal to $500,000 and a taxing unit's current debt rate. Again, clear as mud, right? So voters may petition to hold a tax approval election if the de minimis rate exceeds the voter approval rate and the adopted rate is equal to or lower than the de minimis rate, but higher than the voter approval rate. So the proposed rate does not exceed either one of those. So also included in the council packet is a trend analysis of properties under protest at certification, both by valuation and number of properties for the most recent 5 years, as staff received a request for this information.
Is that it?
Is that enough? Did you want
Okay.
more?
I thought you were just getting started there, Brenda. We were having a good time. Okay, anybody have any questions? Okay. Okay, Brenda, how much of our unused rate remains? We get the 500,000 and we get the rollover of the unused 3.5% increase per year.
Right.
So where does that leave us?
Yes, so I have it in here. It's 1.3396 cents per $100 valuation. So I have that in the voter approval tax rate discussion. We have an unused increment.
Of how much? What percentage?
1.3396 cents per $100 valuation.
Okay, that seems different than what I would have expected to hear. I was kind of expecting to hear, hey, you know, we had a carryover, and the carryover that we've used this year and last year leaves us with 2 or 3 or 4%, as opposed to 1.33%.
Part of that is because we raised tax rate. So if you take a look at, even from last year to this year, we went from 0.29, our 0.3077 to 3.125, but the rate is the same. I mean, in other words, we increased tax rates, but the amount available for the general fund is smaller than what we're getting.
So we don't have any unused increment left from 2023. We only have some left from 2022 and 2021 tax years.
And that's the 1.2% or 3%.
It's the, yes, it's 1.3396 cents per $100. So that's specifically in the tax rate calculation worksheet.
Okay. Okay, no, I just wanted to ask and know how much we were still carrying forward. Now, Bill, as we raise our rates, or as our property values increase, we're capped in how much we can collect out of this. We have the $500,000 that we're using. How does that work with the carryover amounts? And is it you get the 1.33% plus you get the 500, or you get just the 500 and it counts against you and reduces your 1.33?
The 500 is separate from the 1.33.
So is there a reason why we're not using up the 500 instead of dipping into our carryover rate exemption? Which is first, the chicken or the egg in this situation? The 500, or you use the 500 if after everything else has failed, you still need 500?
I think the 500 would be your last resort
That's where you go after you have
after
used
you
up
use
all
up
of
all
your
your
carryover.
other.
Okay. If that's what the rule is, I understand that fully. Okay.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
You use the tax rate, and then if you're exceeding that, if you're under 500,000, then you're okay.
Yeah, you use your carryover, and then you use your 500, and then finally you go to your voters with the
Because some
voter
cities,
approval rate.
the carryover will be less than, more than 500,000. And so the 500,000 will not apply. They won't get that credit.
Okay, so you get the greater of the two. Okay, thank you very much. Nobody has any questions? brings us to item 5.3, presentation, discussion, submission of the city manager's proposed budget for fiscal year 2024-25.
So, City Council, I am pleased to submit the proposed budget for the FY 24-25. It's called the city manager's budget, but it's really not the city manager's. Obviously, it's a team effort, and, you know, this budget's defined and developed based upon a clear set of objectives influenced by the town plan, but is also the goals and objectives established by the city council and those within the departments that were briefed to you. Tonight, I'm going to brief you I'm going to review the city budget. I'm going to do it two ways. I'm going to review the actual document that you should have in front of you, which is the hard copy budget, and I'll go to certain parts of it and certain pages, and I'll point that out. But I also have a PowerPoint slide that, as I'm going through different parts of the budget, that Curtis will then mirror that, and I'll do it both ways. So you may want to look at your hard copy, and then the slides should be in front of you on the monitor. First, I want to just go to the hard copy, and if you turn past the cover, you will see the required statements that are required by law. And I'll just read it to you. The budget will raise more revenue from property taxes than last year's budget by an amount of $232,969, which is a 4.76% increase from last year's budget. The property tax revenue to be raised from new property added to this roll is $80,000. So I think you got that. That total revenue is a combination of operating and bond and debt, and I will talk about that later. Right below that is going to be your record vote, which we'll record later on. But then you see the property tax rate comparisons, of which Brenda did a good job of talking through that before, so I'm not going to review that. And then at the bottom of the page, it says the total debt obligation for the city secured by property taxes is $11,565,711. So I'm now going to move to, in your packet, about 5 or 6 pages in advance, and on the bottom right-hand corner is page 1. It says page 1, and that's the beginning of the city manager's cover letter. The city manager's cover letter is 4 pages, and part of what I'm going to do, acknowledging that you know this, is because this is being recorded and because citizens may come back and see this, I'm going to go over some of these highlights, which normally I may not have to do for you because we've already discussed it, but I'll do it for transparency purposes. Okay, so again, I'm going to start on page 1 of the city manager's cover letter. In the second paragraph, I want to highlight that it says the proposed budget proposes a tax rate of 0.312742 cents per $100 of valuation, and that this proposed rate is a 1/2 cent increase from the prior year's tax rate. And I highlight the fact that that 1 cent is going to be completely allocated to debt costs associated with the voter-approved $10 million bond from the May 2022 bond election. And towards later on in that paragraph, I will highlight that while meeting funding requirements during this period of inflation, the budget accounts for a 2.8% compensation cost of living increase, several new and capital replacement requirements. Kind of important is the general fund expenditures are approximately 6.86 million. That's not too far off from last year. We'll show you that later, a little bit later on. But the total expenditures of all funds are 17.1 million, and that includes the street restoration funding and the Days of Allah project. I'll talk more in details of that. That's all I wanted to highlight on page 1. If you'll go to page 2, the major category is revenues, major revenues, and I'm going to start with the taxable assessed value and / new revenues. So the total taxable assessed value of property, including property tax freeze, is 1.8 billion plus. So again, just a few years ago, we just exceeded 1 billion. Now we're at 1.8 billion. And that represents, in 1 year alone, $92 million increase, or a 5.2% increase from last year's valuations. Not all that's taxable, but eventually it will be. Of that amount, the total taxable new value of improvements in personal property was $25.6 million. And that's a little bit of an increase from last year, a decrease in the total amount from last year, but that's still a good amount. Obviously, new means that the item was not on the 2023 appraisal row. Interesting enough, the average taxable homestead value is now, for the first time ever, over $1 million. And the actual number is actually up $66,210 from last year, which is a 7% increase. Now, just so everyone knows, that doesn't mean that everyone's valuation went up 7%. That means the average taxable value. And so what's happening is when Huntington puts in $4 million homes, that significantly skews the average homestead value, and that's where you're seeing the big valuations. That's where that mostly comes from. The city's portion of the of tax on the average taxable homestead value is approximately $3,136. That's a $251 increase from last year. Switching to ad valorem specific property taxes, I wanted to highlight that the total revenue collected from property taxes will be approximately $5,125,000, and that is a 4.76% increase from last year. However, the additional revenue available for the general fund is only up $133,713, or 3%. And that's because there's additional revenue from ad valorem taxes that's going to pay down the bond. I'm going to move to freeze taxable value. The total freeze taxable value, which are homeowners aged 65 or older or disabled, for the 2024 tax values amounted to $621 million approximately. And that is a 12.8% increase. So the total valuations of tax freeze and disabled went up almost 13%. That's sizable. There are 1,478 residential properties in Chavano Park. I say that again, 1,478, of which 722 qualify for the over tax freeze alone. That is 48.8%, and that's an increase of 27 properties from last year. So some of those properties are coming off, and some are going on. There's a net increase of 27. Want to talk briefly about the no new revenue tax. I know Brenda just covered that, but that's the tax rate that will generate the same amount of property tax as the previous years based upon the tax roll. And this is a comparison using calculations used in the truth in taxation calculations to determine if there's an actual increase. And so I think Brenda already mentioned it. This is higher than our tax rate of 0.312742 is higher than the no new revenue tax rate of 0.308952. If we had not increased the tax rate a half cent, it would be lower. So the half cent increase for for paying off the bonds actually creates a situation where it's higher than the no new revenue. Going again into the voter approval rate, the proposed rate is well below the voter approval rate of 33.8142. So I'm not going to cover any more details than that. Going to sales tax, which is one of our major revenues. as you know, there's a small number of retail companies operating in Chavano Park. We do get sales tax from franchise, from utilities like CPS and some of our cable, et cetera. And we also get sales tax from online sales. And so, for the purposes of this brief, you know, I think last year we budgeted a 6% increase in the sales tax over the previous year's budget, but we fell short of that, and we're going to fall short a little bit this year. And so what I'm telling you is that we are only planning a 2% increase from the last year's budget. It equals about what we think is going to be about a 5% increase in the expected revenue, but for the budget amount, it's only a 2% increase. But the total amount of sales tax now is over $1 million. $1,134,000 is what we have budgeted. That includes the general fund, crime control, and the street funds. I'd like to move to major expenses now. Let me go back before I go to expenses. This slide here shows you, generally speaking, the major revenues, and we budgeted a smaller amount of franchise fees, frankly, because it's based upon, a lot of this is based upon the weather. The franchise fees from CPS are what we're primarily talking about. Cold winters and really, really hot summers, people crank their HVACs up more. We actually get more franchise fees. And so 2021 and 2022 were a little bit of a spike. We based some budgets on that, but then we backed that off so we're not over projecting what we're going to get. Mayor.
Yeah, Bill, I'm sorry. I was looking at your letter on sales tax, and the amount that I saw on Curtis's slide,
That's my slide.
or your slide.
Yeah.
is
That's
different.
because there's a difference between the amount budgeted and the amount we expected to receive. And so I changed this. You should say 5% increase, okay? But it's only a 2% from last year's budget, but it's 5% from what we expected for the revenues that we're actually going to get this year.
Okay, and so the difference in the numbers is because the 1.134 is a fully loaded number, and the one that goes on the page 2 is that which only goes to the general fund.
That's correct, too.
Okay, that second portion of the number doesn't appear for the crime control and street maintenance.
Yeah,
in
I
your
added
letter.
that.
Okay.
In the letter, it's
Okay.
detailed in a
No.
separate location,
Yeah,
yes.
okay, thanks.
Yeah. Next slide. Yeah, and go back one. EMS fees, we budgeted a modest 2.7% increase. Grants, we included the $4 million planned budget, the remaining ARPA money. Interest income, we're still being conservative, but we did budget some of the income we expect to receive. Brenda and I had a good conversation with TexPool today, and even if the Fed backs off the interest rates significantly, I think we're still going to be, as we have budgeted, good to go. And I think that, we plan to have extra so that we're not overstating what we're going to do, but we're going to be in good shape. Okay, expenses. That's on page 3 of the budget and of my letter. I've already kind of talked about it, but the proposed budget in terms of a compensation study does not include any market-driven salary increases, where we would say, that one employee's position was discovered to be, our pay scale, but to be lower than it should be, and that needed to be adjusted. We found that we're right on the money for the last couple of years, and we've done good work on that. And we did a very extensive, comprehensive salary study. But we are including the 2.8% cost of living increase plus a 2.5% step increase, which we do on an annual basis. We briefed you earlier that this includes a 10.2% increase in combined employee health benefits. And as we did last year, that includes a 25% contribution by the city to the dependent health care plans. Moving to the next paragraph on the general fund. I wanted to kind of just say basically, generally speaking, the general fund expenditures are going to remain constant in the day-to-day operations of all equipment. There's no significant increase or decrease or loss of service. And so we think we can do that because we don't anticipate a great amount of inflation next year. And so I'll work through that. I'm going to talk council, police, fire, and some other slides, so I want to move to the capital replacement fund. Do I have a slide on that? Well, let me just give you the overview of this, and I have another slide later. I will show that later. Overall, the budget proposes $392,559 from the general fund revenues and reallocation of interest income from the capital replacement fund to be inputted into the schedule for future replacements of future capital equipment. And we can talk about that in specific terms by department a little bit later on. But you can see that that's almost 40,000 allocated by the to the council. That's 31,000 and some change to admin, almost 300,000 to the fire department, and almost 20,000 to the public works department. And of course, you all know that the fire department, we're talking about 2 big fire trucks and 2 big ambulances are the big drivers of that expense. But the good news is we've updated our capital replacement schedule. We've increased some cost, and then we're still able to meet those funding requirements in the budget as we move forward. Moving to to page 4 of the budget, I wanted to talk the Crime Control Prevention District Fund. This is the only place I'm really going to talk about it. We budgeted revenues of $201,000, primarily coming from sales tax, but some interest income. And our expenses are projected to be $198,000. So we're about budgeted there. We're going to include 2 patrol cars, the 4th year lease payment on the vehicle, and body-worn camera systems, training, National Night Out, and neighborhood watch supplies. Moving to the Street Projects Fund, as you all very well know, we issued the $10 million voter-approved bond for $10 million in May of 2022, and these funds were placed in the Street Project Fund. We expect to have spent approximately $6 million of that. There's a little bit more than that's budgeted, and some of that budget will fall into the next year. But what we've done is we've assumed that we're going to be awarded the $4 million grant. That probably won't be all distributed at that point in time, but still, the budget, we're going to assume the remaining amount of $4 million to be spent, as well as the remaining, as the $4 million federal grant project. And so we are going to budget all $7 million available of that. We budget it whether we spend it or not. That is how that's going to be allocated. Don't think it'll all be spent, but it is budgeted in case we do. Moving to the Street Maintenance Fund, as you know, we've been drawing down on that to pay for portions of the bond every year. And so we expect to receive sales tax revenues of approximately $180,000. We project a total of $189,000 in revenues, and we have budgeted $50,000 in expenditures in case we need to do something that's unprogrammed, and then $150,000 of proposed transfers to debt service to pay down the debt service, and that's coming down there. Court Restricted Fund, a budget of $5,200, and there's nothing unique about that, so that's good. And the debt service I've already kind of talked about. We have a total amount of $11.5 million in outstanding principal. Of that, almost $2 million supported by water, and that's covered separately. Finally, my last note on the city manager's budget is there's no planned reductions in service levels or increases in fees. Incremental improvements in service levels do occur, and we have several upgrades to information technology capabilities and facility improvements. Any questions on that before I go into some of the other budget highlights? Okay, on page 37 of your budget, I wanted to point out that that starts about 7 pages of charts and overview documents. So if I was going to tell someone to go to anywhere in the budget to kind of get a snapshot of what the big picture is, I would start there, because on page 37 it gives you the last 10 years of ad valorem taxes. What it doesn't show you is that a year or two before that we were at 32 cents, and we went down from 32 cents in ad valorem taxes to 28.7, and then we're inching back up as we're having to pay for that bond. But that's pretty simple. The next page shows the historical tax assessable value, and you can see in 2015 we were at $1 billion, and now we're at 1.8. It's over 1.8, and that is in 10 years. We've gone over in detail, or we will go over in detail. Did you go over this page at all? Yeah. So the analysis of tax rates. That's Brenda's magic spreadsheet that does an Excel spreadsheet, and that gives us the actual predictions of what we're going to get on our ad valorem taxes, and how much can go to the bond debt, how much is actually paid for by that comes to operating funds, and then it gives you the averages for the average taxpayer. Followed by the sales tax, by the org charts, and then by the number of employees, and I'm not going to cover that. Starting on page 45 is the City Council's goals and objectives. We went through a number of workshops where we fleshed these goals and objectives out, and this budget accounts for those goals and objectives. There's nothing in the goals and objectives that I don't believe is a whole. But if you see something that we've missed, that, hey, you've got an objective here, but we don't have funding for it, please let me know. I want to go to page 49. Page 49 is the general fund overview. It's only the general fund, and it really gives a comparison from last year's budget with the projected next year's budget. It starts out with the beginning fund balance, and beginning fund balance is projected to be $2.8 million, and it would carry over to next year, and then we will, because we have a balanced budget, it assumes that we will stay the same. I want to talk about that a little bit, because if you look at the next page, you'll see that there is the proposed, first column is the proposed city manager budget expenditures of $6.8 million, and it shows that same fund balance at 2.8. I would point out that last year, that number 2.857 is $324,000 from the same page if you looked at last year's budget. That's because over last year's budget, we had that much savings, and we had additional revenues that came from interest. So our projected fund balance increased from last year's budget to this year's budget, 324. We don't reflect that on the page before. But what's really going to happen is that at the end of the year, when the auditors come and they say, well, you didn't spend as much as you budgeted and you got more revenue, this is going to go up a little bit. Now, it's not going to go up $324,000, because in the next meeting, we're going to give you a budget amendment. And that budget amendment is going to account for some of these extra revenues and cost savings that we had. And we'll talk about that at another thing. But I want to point out that if you look at that line on page 50 where it says what is the percentage of the projected fund balance unaudited to the projected balance? That's 42%. Our policy says we need to be between 25 and 50%. 42 is a good place. It's not as good as 50, but you could say 50 is too much. But last year, what was that number? You may not remember, but it was 38%. So we went from last year's 38, Brenda's brilliant budgeting and accounting, we're at 42%. So that's good. I thought I'd bring that up. After that, you start getting into the Encode stuff, and I'm not going to cover anything in the budget for Encode at this point in time. I want to go to the PowerPoint slides that we've shown you in the workshops, and I just want to talk about the major funding purchases and items, and you're not going to see a lot of change from the last workshop, but there'll be a few. And I'm just going to go by department. So if I go to City Council, you can see that we're going, obviously, you're going to fund the SIB loan partial payment for the water main relocation. We have to fund the 2022 bond service debt, which I point out is $728,000. So the fact that we're having a $728,000 payment a year, and we haven't had to raise the taxes that much, is a really good thing, and it speaks to the health of our finances. The capital replacement allocation from the general fund is $172,000, and that's fully funded. The reimbursement of the capital replacement fund for the Northwest Military Highway land purchase, I want to explain that a bit. We started with a 5-year plan. We funded the first 2 years with ARPA money. Because we are short a little bit on the budget, because the tax revenues didn't go up a lot, in this budget, and this can change, but what I did, and I talked to a number of you, is I then took it from 3 remaining years to 5 remaining years. But we funded the allocated portion of the 5th year, that $39,600 is funded in this budget. It would have been $66,000. So I saved, $27,000. And I've explained to you before, most of you, that when we originally did the budget, our revenues didn't match the expenses, and we had to go back and we had to tweak our expenses. In some cases, we had to downplay the expenses. I don't believe there was any mission essential expenses that we've cut. And we can look at that as we go. And then again, I will tell you that as we get valuations from BCAD, by the time we get into September, I expect there will be some additional revenues available, but we'll have to play that by ear. We are budgeting 6 city-sponsored events for $37,000. We get $7,000 of that from the Crime Control Prevention District, $31,000 essentially from the general fund. We have included the COLA and the step increases. You can see those numbers as that's listed. The landscaping plan, for the City Hall, the monuments, and Northwest Military Highway, we've included $23,000 for, that's several different items, but we've done that. Additional parking in City Hall. We have not included that in terms of general fund money. We have included that categorically in the federal grant of $4 million. And Curtis and I are working with the grant manager to clarify, to make sure that do we have to amend that to include parking. Is our current application good enough to do parking? But we're going all out in terms of planning the Days of Allah project to include the drainage, the expansion of the highway, the sidewalks, the bike lanes, and also parallel parking, but also the parking in behind City Hall. So that's going to happen. So it's included, but we have to fine tune that. One of the Alderman Powers had talked about enhancing the City Hall marquee enhancement. We haven't fleshed out how much that would cost, a concept for that, but I have not been able to include that into the budget. We can look at that at another time. That's certainly something that if City Council directs us, we can continue to come up with a concept, get cost estimates, and that could be something that could be done mid-year as well. but I wanted to acknowledge that. We had some citizens, and I know Alderman Kautz has talked about the Cliffside Monument sign. We did allocate out of ARPA $4,600 in funds for that. I think that's going to be far more than we need on that. I actually met with a Boy Scout yesterday, and I said, hey, you could do that, and we'll even provide the materials. So it's possible that he may jump on that, and we could get that done. There's a possibility of one on the north side, one on the south side, but I have included that in the budget, so we can do that. Any questions on the city council? That's on page 54 of your budget. Next slide. On 57 of your budget is the admin and court. And so I highlighted a couple things there. We did fund, obviously, the increase of the employee health benefit. That goes across all departments, but we did increase, that's $47,000. The HVAC replacement, we upped the funds. It used to be $7,000, then it was $9,000. I put $15,000 if case one of the HVAC goes out, because we're going to get the upgraded model that would have the dehumidifier. And that's what we did last year with the police department, and that has provided marvelous results. Expand the City Hall public announcement system. We're going to expand it so that we can have speakers on the police side. So when we're doing Christmas lighting ceremonies, we want to speak, and we want to speak to the entire grounds. That the speaker system will expand. We have included that. We plan to do that for $15,000. The AV capabilities in the City Council Executive Room, $5,000 is allocated for that, and we are budgeting that. And we're going to make that a world-class conference room where we're able to Zoom and brief and to do things with screens and not just assemble it and disassemble it every time we go in there. We want to upgrade the city's building codes to the 2021 year. It's not a big cost, $1,200, but we have allocated for that. We talked about hardening the windows of the court and the entrance into the court and the admin section. We think we're going to be able to do it this year. It is already budgeted. We've been budgeting for the last 4 years. If we don't get it done this year, we will budget it, but I think we're going to be able to do it. I've got a quote from a glass company with some film on it, but Chief is also working a quote to buy ballistic glass and just install that. We had a Zoom meeting today, but we didn't get all the partners there. We've got another meeting tomorrow morning at 10. City Secretary asked for a couple things. We asked her to prioritize that. She wanted item number 7 more than item number 8. But we are including that. That was a kind of iffy. We didn't know if we were going to be able to do it, but we did do that with ARPA money. These ARPA funds will expend all the ARPA at the end of the year. Any questions on that? Next slide. Information technology is kind of a Curtis's deal. It's kind of mostly covered in the admin section, but we are going to implement the two-factor authentication software. That's a low cost of $800. We're going to expand our server data storage for $4,000. We're going to implement the MDM software for city mobile devices. That's something that was not funded the last time we talked. I've moved that up to fund that. What I did was I used item number 5, and I've taken that, I've not funded that. So we talked about that. Number 5 is a nice thing to do. Number 3 is a nice thing to do too, but it's really dealing with security of our systems, so we thought that would be more important. Any questions on that? Those are all funded by ARPA money. Next slide. Public Works can be found on page 70 of your budget. We're going to continue the tree maintenance and the ground maintenance program that we've had done in the last number of years. We're planning on including the break room furniture, but yes, funded by donations. We have included the Lock Hill Selma median funding, which includes the water bills. Just note, we haven't had to water at all this year because the rain has been sporadic and continuous enough to where we haven't done it. Our intent for watering is just to keep the trees alive, not make it, an immaculate golf course. But it's looking pretty good. I drove down it the other day. Replacing aged and weathered signs, and we'll do it in the old Chavano based upon priority. We allocated $4,000 for that. The cleanup of well site 4, we moved to the water. So we're not going to use any general fund and public works stuff. All that mostly came from when we did the cul-de-sacs, water reline locations, water line crossings. All that spoil came from there. We're going to take it out of water funds. Any questions on public works? Next slide is the fire department paid, found on page 77. For crime control, we considered the body armor from ARPA, but we are going to fund that out of Crime Control Prevention District. That's the only other thing that we're going to fund as a one-off on the Crime Control Prevention District. It's a pretty low cost of $3,000, so that is funded in the piece. The two specific items the chief requested, we are funding using ARPA funds, so that's in the budget. We did not add a certification pay to the arson investigators. I know we'll want to look at that as we move forward, if not this year, in the future. And then the replacing of the fire chief's and fire marshal's Tahoe, there was a $9,000 bill to that. We are not going to fund it in this budget. It'll be on a future budget, obviously, as we move forward. Any questions on that? Next slide is the police department. We have, thanks to the policing subcommittee that we've worked through that, we've got support from City Council for forging a path forward for strategic improvements to of the fire department. Cost is going to be less than $5,000 for creating a lieutenant's position, removing the corporal positions, removing one sergeant position, and upgrading the assistant police chief. So total projected cost less than $5,000. That is included in the budget, and it should be no issue. And we appreciate your support on that. Supporting the replacing the 2 patrol vehicles is done as per schedule. That's funds allocated from the Crime Control Prevention District funds. No significant issue with that, and that's online. We talked about a UAS startup program. We talked about a medium drone and a large drone. What we initially thought we were not going to be able to support either one of those, but in this budget we have proposed supporting the smaller drone as an incremental way to start that program. We'll look at a medium-sized drone in the future. That medium-size really gets you the night capabilities that you need, but we're using ARPA funds for that. That's projected to be $4,500, and we can talk about that more if we need to. The 2006 commemorative badges for $5,000. We're not going to budget it supported with funds from the city. We are going to budget it from donations being considered. And so Alderman Miller and Powers have got a great initiative going on where we're going to solicit donations, $225 at the max, maybe dropped down to $200 for individual badges where people will donate that and sponsor a badge, up to 22 badges, and that will be in the budget, and it'll be advertised in Roadrunners, and we're looking to do that. So already got a number of people that have signed up to donate. I don't see any anticipated problem in getting that at the end state, and we'll get as many badges as the donations are received. Any questions on the police department? Next slide is the water utility. Funded a lot of things, some things we didn't. We've got 3 important things in here that I want to highlight, and these numbers on the cost are going to change, but the most critical thing we need to do in this next year's budget is to repair and repaint the ground storage tank for Chavano Drive. I think that's a 110,000 gallon tank. Could be wrong on that, but we're working with our engineer on that now. We just received this year's tank inspections. We haven't received the report, We're going to wait till we get to that report. Should be in a couple of weeks. The engineer will make final determinations as to whether or not it'd be cheaper to repair and more cost-effective in the long term to repair the top of that tank, to replace the top of that tank, replace the entire tank, and go out for bid. So right now we have a repair and replace budgeted. The funds we are going to use are unrestricted funds from the water fund, but they were basically reimbursed from ARPA grant money that we got from Bear County. So we have that money available. It's probably going to cost more than $75,000. Over the next couple of months, we're going to refine that. We have a fund balance of about $1.2 million in the water fund. I will show you that later. One of the things that's not a high priority, but we may do it this year depending on all the other things we got going on. We started to see some rust on the top of the storage tank at Huebner. We're probably good. It could probably be deferred for a year or 2 or 3, but that's on our list. We're going to budget the repainting of that tank roof. We're going to have to take it offline, and so part of our thought is if we have to take it offline, should we at that time just repaint the whole thing, even though the sides are okay. Again, we're going to look at the tank inspection report, see what is new this year, and our engineer will be consulting with him. In order to best take the Huebner offline and to extend the life of the motor and the pump for well 7, we want to install a variable frequency drive. We have one on 8 already. And so we've been working, we had $100,000 as a placeholder. Johnny just briefed me today on a bid he got for, it's about $75,000. We're gonna have to go out for bids on that. We just got one vendor to give us a basic bid. We got more work to do. That's gotta be, because it's over 50,000, that's gotta be done right. Well, no, that's by board. So we can do it using by board prices, and I feel pretty good about that. But we're going to budget that. I plan to put the VFD into operation. We've got to build a storage building around it. We have to put air condition. It's got to be programmed. It's got to be SCADA. There's a lot of work to do that. Just to replace a VFD, you may only be talking $20,000, but to put the whole package together, it's $75,000. That's going to extend the life of those wells. The comprehensive water model, phase 2, that is not budgeted. That's something that we are going to get a report in the next month before this budget goes, and it's going to come from land engineering. And it is going to provide us a comprehensive, updated mapping, GIS map of our current system. It will have the exact location of our valves, our fire hydrants. It'll have replications as to what type of pipe it is, what size pipe it is, where the crossings are, all that. The question is going to be whether or not we really need a model that shows the capabilities and the gallons per minute and the pressures and all those things. Because we have a fairly simple system and we're not actually looking to expand it, the question is whether those dollars spent, which is probably well over $100,000, and that have reoccurring dollars, is actually going to be beneficial for any reason. And that's something that part of phase 1 is going to provide some recommendations and some software considerations that will lead to the decision of phase 2 and 3. The WAC leadership of the WAC is leaning not to move forward with that. The consider options for incrementally purchasing additional water. We briefed the WAC on Monday on that. The cost has gone up from 2017, where we purchased water for $4,900 a square foot. Last year, there were some purchases for about $6,600 to $7,000 per acre foot. And now we're being told that the development that is being occurred in Bexar County, it comes with a requirement to purchase acre feet so SAWS can provide water to those developments. and that there is talk of $11,000 per acre foot for that. So if you just do round numbers, $10,000 an acre foot, 100 acre feet, that's 1 million. We have a reserve of about 1.2 right now. We obviously can't expend our entire reserve on acre feet. Water is going to get more expensive over time. There's going to be more regulations on the water. It's going to be more of a focus area. So on most years, we don't need more than the 900 we currently have. But the last couple of years, we've had to lease more. And that's an acceptable, actually a very acceptable solution as long as there's water to lease. I can't assure you that in 10 years, we will have that same amount of water to lease at the same cost-efficient manner. So it's something that I am going to think real hard about. I don't have it in this budget, but I'm going to be looking at budgeting maybe anywhere from $250,000 to $500,000 in this year's budget for consideration of acre feet so that we have it available. We already talked about the Public Works break room furniture. We've been talking about item number 8, installation of emergency power supply at Huebner, some sort of mobile system or a permanent system for a while. We haven't included in this budget. We have even if we had the money, we have so many things going on. We really have to also manage change management and efforts within our Public Works department. And with the repair of the tanks, the VFW, all the other things that we have in preparation, it's not mission critical at this point in time. It's something we want to get to. It's nice to do, so we have not included that. Public Works Director wanted to add water sample stations. I think we have 12, but we've added 5 into this budget, and incrementally the plan is to continue to do that so we have real nice, safe water sample stations. We really want to put well 1 back into operation because that gives us more redundancy and capability. But again, that's a big task. You can't be painting water towers, doing water lines, and doing all this at once and do a good job. Still on our list of things to do. We want to continue to flesh out things. If we do a water model, that'll help us. But, you know, it's still on the board, and we want to consider it just as a matter of when. Have not done it this year. It could be done mid-year too. Questions on water on page 98. Start on 98 of your budget. Next slide. Capital replacement starts on 120. And so I don't really have any slides to show you on PowerPoint. You might turn to the capital replacement on 120. And what it does is it shows you, again, there's a column for this year's adopted budget, then there's a column for the proposed budget. And it shows you that the beginning capital replacement budget for this last year was just a little over $2 million, but by the time we put in $328,000, we account for our revenues and the expenditures. That was going to bump up to a projected fund balance in our capital replacement of $2.4 million. So that's where we start next year. And then if we take a look at the expenditures and versus revenues minus other transfers, we're looking at the end of next year a fund balance of $2.3 million in the capital replacement fund. That just gives you the overview. If you look at the next page, page 121, and you may have to turn it sideways, you're looking at the admin and the Public Works thing. You'll see that there's 2 columns in pink there. One is the allocated portion that comes from the investment income that we earned in the capital replacement, and one is from the general fund. And that you can see that the total amount allocated to the admin section this year was $31,000. If you look down at the Public Works, it's basically $5,000 in investment income and $19,000 in general fund. More importantly, if you move to page 122, that's the fire department. That's where the majority of our capital replacement funds are. I will point out that both of the ambulances, that number of the estimated cost increase was updated this year. I think they were like 200,000 or less than 200,000 last year. We've updated that and then accounted for the increases proportionately. And same thing with the Hallmark fire apparatus pumper truck. It was 800,000 last year. Chief bumped that up to 950,000. That means that the yearly cost required to fund those over the life of, into getting a replacement goes up, and we were able to match that. So there's a couple key points here. One is that we still have a schedule. Schedule is later on found in your piece where we brief out the entire schedule, but this summarizes it, and we have a model year, estimated year to replace, total life of the years, and we have a proportion amount of funding that is going to allow us to pay cash when we get ready to buy those major capital items from the capital replacement fund. It doesn't have to come out of operating expenses. Any questions on that? If you go to page 128, page 128 is the Crime Control and Prevention District Fund. It shows you that we have a healthy fund balance of $381,000. It's projected by the end of the year. We're expected to bring in about $200,000 and expend about $200,000. I'll remind you that we're only replacing 2 patrol vehicles. Some years we replace, 2 patrol vehicles and the code enforcement and or the CID or other items there. So this is kind of a bare minimum year, But that's all good. I wanted to point that out. Another major fund we use is the PEG fund, found on page 133. And every year we've got a fund balance of $151,000. We're expecting about $17,000 in revenue. There's only certain things we can use for the PEG fund. We've got $20,000 allocated for use of it next year. So that keeps us at a healthy fund balance, but that shows we're doing that. I want to talk about page 136 real briefly. That's the tree fund. We're expecting a fund balance. Well, it's a tree fund and beautification, so we've expanded that to allow for beautification of other public property in the city. We have a fund balance at the end of this year projected to be $104,000. We're expecting about $12,000 of tree trimming revenues. We have budgeted $25,000. We don't typically spend all that, but we have that available. Finally, the last thing I wanted to point out was the street maintenance fund. We started the fund, that's page 140. So if you turn to page 140, that's the overview slide. We started with a beginning fund balance of $415,000. I think we had $800,000 when we started repairing streets. We're going to draw down on that quite a bit this year. We will only have $80,000 projected by the end of this year, but counting the expected revenues next year, we're going to add an extra $189,000 in revenue. I briefed you earlier, $50,000 of that's expenditures going to be reserved for streets in case there's an unexpected street project we have to do. We have $50,000 to. We're not going to spend if we don't need it. And then $150,000 of that will be allocated towards the bond fund, the bond repayment. So we show a $69,000 fund balance, but it's probably going to be more of 69 plus close to 50 unless we spend it on an unprogrammed fund. So, Council, that is all I was going to do to highlight the proposed budget. I think I covered the high points, gave a good overview for the audience who may be watching on film, and I subject to your questions.
Okay. We're now open for questions. Lee?
You have two different pages for this monument down at Cliffside. Why, in my mind, you've got it about in the middle of the budget, and here at the end, we've got the beautification. Why can that be the beautification be used to put that monument down there? It would enhance the appearance of the city.
We have funds in the beautification fund that we could fund that. Instead of using ARPA money, we could use that.
Okay, but ARPA would be a better deal, would it not? I mean, I'm just seeing why it was done this way.
ARPA's a one-time cost. I mean, we try to use things that are one-time costs for ARPA. If there was other things that City Council wanted to do and they wanted to, that's a good point. Brenda and I had that conversation very deliberately. We chose to fund it in this budget from the ARPA. If you wanted to take it out of the beautification fund, you could do that. And
No, I'm just questioning why they seem to go hand in hand. I was wondering why they're bifurcated that way.
Well, we were looking at what are we going to use the ARPA fund. We have about 40,000 left, and we were looking at what are those one-time expenses, and that's how that fleshed out. If we get into a bind where we need more funds available because we want to reprioritize things or we want to up it, and we need 4,500, we could then reallocate the funding from beautification and then free up that 4,500 for ARPA.
Okay, during your presentation, you also, when you were talking about that monument down at Cliffside, you used the phrase north side and south side. Are you talking about putting one on either side of the
Yes,
street?
most of the side streets on the east side have one on the north side and the south side. The south side's a little bit more of a challenge
Yeah.
because the terrain. Johnny and I walked it personally, though, and it can be done very well.
I'm questioning the fact that you want to have a Boy Scout do this, that there's a topo situation, even on the north side, which is the milder of the two sides. How much elevation are you going to put on this thing?
There's a flat area there that we can be cleared out,
Okay.
and then the landowner said we could even go into his right of way. So that one's low risk. A Boy Scout could do that. The other one may be more problematic. We would definitely have to contact the landowner on the south side.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Maggie?
The guardrail, the metal guardrail. There should be no additional guard railing in front of the monument on Days of Allah. We could think about lifting it. I mean, that was one of the ideas that we had. We really would need to come up with a broader concept and then flesh that out. I mean, we haven't started any effort on that. But that would be a different funding than the Days of Allah funding, and I'm sure that would not be covered under the federal grant. But once we saw Days of Allah and see how it looked, then you could say, okay, then you might have a holistic picture of what it looks like and what you might want to do.
Okay. We are going to continue on with some more budget discussion in our follow-on meetings, so we could probably go on to item number 5.4, if everybody's okay with that, and then we'll go into our workshop to discuss any more questions.
Do you all have hard copies of 5.4?
Yeah, yes, we have
Okay.
the motion.
Okay. Well, okay.
Item,
Well, there's a PowerPoint slide. Brendan's already
well,
gone through it.
I was just going to introduce the item.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mayor.
That's okay.
I thought you had.
Just for the audience purpose. Item 5.4, discussion action, consider a proposed tax rate for fiscal year 2024-25 and take a record vote and schedule public hearing on the proposed tax rate. Brenda and Bill. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm going to take this one. We allocated eeny, meeny, miny, mo, in which we were going to do. But in your packet, you have a staff summary sheet for this record vote of the tax rate. And there are 4 attachments. The first attachment you've already seen, which is that one-page magic spreadsheet that Brenda does that gets all the calculations. In your packet, there is 2 other ones that you haven't seen yet. One is a notice of tax rates and the second one is a notice of the public hearing draft. The fourth attachment is the property tax rate worksheets, which Brenda has already showed you. You have a hard copy of that. And we just included that for informational purposes, so I'm not going to belabor that. Just a little background history. On 8 August, we provided and presented the city manager's budget, even though it wasn't in a formal meeting, but we are now met that formal requirement in today's meeting on August 4th, and we provided the city's no new revenue voter approval de minimis tax rates to the city council. The next step in the truth in taxation law is for city council to consider the proposed tax rate. Brenda talked a little bit about that earlier. If the proposed tax rate will exceed the voter approval tax rate or the no new revenue tax rate, whichever is lower, city council must take a record vote and schedule the required public hearing, and that's what we're doing right now. So, again, to go into the discussion, I just submitted the proposed 2024 city manager budget, and we provided the analysis of the tax, and it shows the expected revenue by tax based on the 24 certified tax roll, and as well as the no new revenue tax calculations. The proposed tax rate is higher than the no new revenue tax rate of 0.308956. Brenda told you it's significantly lower than the voter approval tax rate, which is a good thing. So, because it's higher, we will be required to post a notice of the calculated tax rates on the city's website. Actually, we've already drafted that. Curtis has got that, and we've met that requirement there. You have a copy in your packet. It's also posted to the, and we've provided it to the Bexar County Tax Assessor Collector. In your packet is the draft notice of public hearing. And that is a format that is used and provided to us by the Bexar County Tax Assessor Collector. At the conclusion of your vote, we will complete that, which will record each one of the aldermen's votes for the tax rate, and then that will be updated and it'll be posted in the paper. We're going to do that either the 28th or the next week. So we are required to hold one public hearing on the proposed tax rate. One of the agenda items in the next agenda item is the scheduling of the public hearing as we move forward. So at this point in time, council must take a record vote on the proposed tax rate and schedule at least one public hearing if the proposed tax rate exceeds the no new revenue rate. I already told you that it does slightly. This vote is only for consideration of the proposed tax rate. Council is not required to adopt what you're proposing and you're going to vote on. But whatever rate is voted on in this next agenda item, you can't go any higher. You can only go lower. That would be on the 16th of September, where you formally adopt the tax rate and that tax ceiling. So again, you have a couple options. The motion requested is to propose a tax rate of 0.0312742 per 100 valuation, which includes the M&O rate of 0.275 and some change, and the INS rate of 0.37 and some change. We've discussed that with you before, and we have gained a head nod that was the way we wanted to go. So it's now time to vote for it.
Okay,
Mayor.
thank you very much, Bill. At this time, I will entertain a motion. We will vote. The vote is to set a maximum property tax rate to be considered for fiscal year 2025. It is not a vote for the actual fiscal year 2025 tax rate. Conrad, I recognize you for a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to propose a tax rate of 0.312742 per $100 valuation, which includes an M&O rate of 0.275606 and an INS rate of .037136 and hold a record vote.
Okay, we have a motion from Conrad. Do we have a second? We have a second from Maggie. We will now take a record vote. Please indicate your preference as a yay or a nay. Alderman Alaman, yay
Yay.
or nay? Yay. Alderman Kirkendall, yay or nay?
Yay.
Alderman Kirkendall, yay. Alderman Powers, yay or nay? Alderman Powers, yay. Alderman Couts, yay or
Yay.
nay? Alderman Couts, yay. Alderman Miller, yay or nay?
Yay.
Alderman Miller, yay. The yeas are 5-0, 4. I'll place this back up for reconsideration. There being no request for reconsideration, the motion carries 5-0, which brings us to item number 5.5, discussion action, schedule public hearing on proposed fiscal year 2024-25. Bill, Brenda, who wants to tell us what dates we need to get together?
I think I'm up again, Mayor.
Okay,
So traditionally, Chevino Park has scheduled 2 hearings on both the proposed budget and tax rate to allow its residents sufficient opportunity to express their opinion. Council has been previously provided the fiscal year 25 budget calendar, which set a special meeting for September 6th for the first reading of the budget and the first public hearings. By ordinance, the regular September meeting is the 3rd Monday, not the normal 4th Monday of the month, this year being September 16th. This earlier date assists the Bexar County Tax Assessor Collector's Office in preparing the mailing of the bills on October 1st. Also, the city had tentatively scheduled a budget workshop at 5 p.m. before the regular council meeting on August 26th. Staff understands there is now a conflict at that time and is requesting council consider a budget workshop after the September 9th special meeting if needed. So tonight, staff is requesting council to schedule the public hearings on the fiscal year 25 budget and tax rates on September 9th and 16th at 6:30 p.m. and provide consensus for a budget workshop after the September 9th special meeting.
okay. Other than Bill Stipek's birthday and Bill's birthday, what are the conflicts on the 26th?
The UTSA Athletic Department.
Orange
The
shirt.
reception?
Yeah, so we're having our meeting for sure. Oh, the reception is, okay, it's the reception that creates the conflict. Okay. Well, I think that we should have a party, and maybe we could invite Bill Stipek, because his name also is Bill, and we could have just kind of a big birthday party.
We could do that.
Okay. I do have a salient question here. Are we at a point that we're going to have another budget workshop meeting on the 9th? Or have we finished all of the sausage making that goes on with this budget?
I'm very confident in what we've got is balanced and established and meets all the requirements. I would pose this: if there is a line item in those PowerPoints that has kind of got, we want to readdress, we want to reconsider or rebalance, you have time to figure this out. I mean, so then that would be what would be required.
Okay.
I know I need to look at the water acre
Well,
feet.
the workshop can be set by you or me, and so we'll leave that to the, please check your calendars that we're going to have 4 people here for the 9th. That is the important thing. Will we have 4 people here for the
I'll
9th?
be here.
Okay, and Bill and I will decide whether we need one of us will determine whether we need a workshop or not before that meeting, but we may not be having a workshop on the 9th.
A lot of the major, not decisions, but the consensus was gained because of our sub-working groups with the police and the compensation. So really, that was great work by the council in getting your head in the game and then helping us shape the budget. if there's any other particular items, because, you know, you really need to look at this. And then if there's something that is a head scratcher or something we missed, please bring it to our attention. What we're going to be doing now is fleshing out the rest of the budget. There's a couple of the charts we did not include. We always wait till the end of that. We'll begin preparing a final version of that. I've got to change my city manager's letter to propose to actual. Anything that's a consideration, you know, we're available. Now, in theory, we're also going to adjourn this meeting and then go into a budget workshop.
Yes, we're going to go into a workshop after we finish this meeting. We've got a couple of agenda items to consider. Okay, so at this time, I'll entertain a motion to schedule the fiscal year 2024-25 budget and tax rate public hearings on September the 9th and the 16th at 6:30. Do we have a motion?
So move.
We have a motion from Maggie.
Second.
We have a second from Pete. There being no discussion, all in favor say aye.
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 All in favor, all opposed, same sign. The motion carries. Brings us to item number 6. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Lee, a second from Conrad. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. The motion carries. We're adjourned. We're going to take 5 minutes